Wisconsin Congressman and former vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan has now been elected as the new Speaker of the House of Representatives. This comes after John Boehner said he would step down by the end of this month. To make things more complicated, it all happened while congressional leaders worked to hammer out a final deal to fund the federal government. Nick spoke with North Country Congresswoman Stefanik about the news on Capitol Hill earlier today.
Okay, Congresswoman, thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So first of all, let's talk about the big news down in Washington today, and that is the election of Congressman Paul Ryan as the new Speaker of the House of Representatives. You have, well, you've got some background with Congressman Ryan. You were an aide to him and helped with some debate prep back when he was the vice presidential candidate.
Absolutely. So Paul Ryan is a friend, and he is the right person to unify not only the Republican conference, but Congress as a whole. And as you heard from his speech today, he talked a lot about Democrats and Republicans coming together, but also getting back to focus on the committee work and the legislative priorities of this nation. So focusing on growing economic opportunity for all Americans. And I think you're going to see a unified conference, at least moving forward.
He's got a pretty big challenge up ahead of him, aside from the fact that it's such a complicated job being Speaker of the House to begin with. But, you know, over the last several weeks, there have been these fissures that have apparently opened up within Congress, within the House Republican Conference on a variety of issues. Is Congressman Ryan up to the task of being Speaker Ryan?
Absolutely. Obviously, it is very clear to the public that this has been a challenging time for Congress, and Paul had a tremendous outpouring of support on the floor today. He won 238 Republican votes, which is well beyond the 218 required to become Speaker of the House, and he is committed to working hard to unify. I know Paul as a friend, and he is a very talented listener. He is a thoughtful worker. He has a very strong work ethic, and he will take the time to listen to some of the very valid concerns about rank-and-file members of Congress who feel that they do not have a voice. And I think you're going to see a wiping of the slate clean, in the sense that Paul is able to reassess some of the rules and the protocols and the way the House works to make sure that we're modernized going into the future. But I'm confident in his abilities to meet the task. And it also is a testament to Paul is a very young speaker. We haven't had a speaker this young, certainly in the last 100 years. And Paul was elected when he was 28 years old. He's earned a tremendous reputation as chairman of 2 committees. He is a proven negotiator across the aisle. And it shows that as a young person in Congress, which I am today, that you can really take on a leadership position for the sake of the country.
Do you expect rank-and-file lawmakers, as you mentioned, to be empowered moving forward under Speaker Paul Ryan? How do you expect to see that power manifest itself in changing the structures of the way Congress, the House of Representatives, is working moving forward?
I do think that you'll see changes, and I'm part of a group of members that's working together who come from very different districts in terms of the political makeup of the district. I, of course, represent New York's 21st District, the North Country, which is a swing district, although I have a tremendous support from Republicans, Independents, Conservatives, and Democrats. And I'm working with other members of Congress to address some of the rules, and also to address how committees are assigned, and also to discuss how we can empower members to move legislation through committees. We really want to get back to regular order and make sure that the priorities of the American public and of our districts, so creating jobs, overhauling the tax code, protecting our national security, we're able to get things done on behalf of our constituents.
One of the last things, just to switch gears here a little bit, one of the last things that outgoing Speaker John Boehner was able to put together was an agreement on spending moving forward, avoiding a government shutdown. It's actually kind of what set all of this in motion really to begin with. What was your reaction to the agreement that was put in place? And do you expect something like that to hold in the coming weeks and months?
Absolutely. This budget agreement is a bipartisan agreement. It includes the administration. It included the Senate at the negotiating table, and of course Speaker Boehner, Leader Pelosi, as well as Leader McConnell and Senator Reid on the Senate side. I voted in support of the budget agreement. Number one, it replaces sequestration, which has had devastating effects on our nation's military. I represent Fort Drum and have been an outspoken critic of sequestration, which was a bad law. It was a bipartisan disaster, and I'm pleased that the budget agreement replaces sequestration. This provides more certainty and stability for our troops, and it provides more certainty and stability for our budget process. You know, when I ran for Congress, I was committed to being an independent voice to bring common sense and to avoid political brinksmanship, and that's what this budget agreement does. We are no longer going to be governing from crisis to crisis. We've avoided a government default, and I was proud to cross party lines and vote for this bipartisan agreement.
When it comes, though, to Fort Drum and how Fort Drum is faring in Washington, D.C., are you worried at all that there's going to be, continued efforts to find ways of cutting not just the military broadly, but more specifically cutting into Fort Drum, the troop levels there, things like that? I know there have been past efforts, and yourself and Senator Schumer in the U.S. Senate have said that, it could have been far worse, the previous cuts that we've seen there. But are you worried that it's going to be, continually looked at for potential cuts?
That's why this budget agreement is so important, because it provides the certainty and the stability over the next 2 years. So we're not in this tenuous place. Fort Drum, we've had a tremendously successful year. I led the effort against the cuts to Fort Drum, and out of any Army installation across the country, Fort Drum fared the best. We were at risk of losing 16,000 active duty servicemen and women, and we lost in the less than 100, and that is a big win for Fort Drum. The role that the 10th Mountain plays and Fort Drum in terms of its training facility is unique compared to any other military installation across the country, and I am continuing to be a vocal proponent to protect and strengthen Fort Drum. I was the only freshman on the conference committee, which includes the House and the Senate, as we negotiate our National Defense Authorization Act, which includes important funding for an NCO academy at Fort Drum, for a potential East Coast missile defense site that Fort Drum's one of the 4 sites under consideration. So I will continue being a strong advocate for Fort Drum as I serve in Congress. And I have the proven track record that Fort Drum has won when we've been at risk of potentially losing.
Moving forward, also, now that you've got a Speaker of the House, somebody who is pretty familiar with the tax code, I think it's fair to say, do you think that there will be any efforts, any successful efforts, to potentially rewrite the nation's tax code moving forward and potentially simplify a lot of that? I know that's been a major issue for Congressman Ryan.
Absolutely. It's a major issue for many of us. I ran on fundamental tax reform, on overhauling the tax code starting from scratch. I'm optimistic that we will have tax reform. I think, unfortunately, it may have to wait for the next administration, but I know that that's something that now Speaker Ryan is committed to. His track record in Congress, he's been focused on pursuing fundamental tax reform. And look, it's important to my constituents because the tax code is too complicated. It's over 73,000 pages long. The vast majority of Americans and New Yorkers have to rely on outsiders to help them file their taxes. It's riddled with special interest loopholes. We need a flatter, fairer, simpler tax code, which will help create jobs. It will help spur economic growth. And I certainly will be a part of that conversation. And I know that Speaker Ryan is committed to fundamental tax reform.
Just lastly, before I let you go, we're almost out of time. Kind of a broad issue here, and that's this idea that, as you mentioned early on in the interview, you represent a quote-unquote swing district, one that has a number of Republican voters, but also a pretty sizable amount of Democratic voters, too. And, there is continuously, it seems like, kind of a fight to, win control of that district, win control of, say, the Hudson Valley district that Congressman Gibson represents. Is there still a voice in Congress for members like yourself, for lawmakers like yourself, who represents a battleground district? Is that still a feasible kind of thing to represent in Congress, given how polarizing it can often be in Washington?
Absolutely, and just look at upstate New York for your examples. I work on a daily basis with Congressman Chris Gibson, with Congressman John Katko, Congressman Tom Reed, Congressman Richard Hanna. These are thoughtful individuals who are proud Republicans, but are also willing to work across the aisle and bring independent-minded leadership. One issue this past week that's incredibly important to upstate New York is the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank. We were part of the leading efforts to make sure that that bill was brought to the floor. It's important for our jobs in upstate New York, and we have been heard loud and clear. We are part of the common sense governing wing of the party, and this is why you're seeing so much support from our constituents at home. People are tired of a broken Washington, of a Washington that's not working. They want to see us get things done, and in my short, less than a year here, I've been able to keep those promises to my constituents.
Alrighty, Congresswoman Stefanik joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.